This tractor hasn't started in 5 years. The millionaire pointed at the massive machine that 17 mechanics couldn't fix. She was just a mechanic, a widow he himself had rejected years ago. But what no one imagined was that in 11 hours, this woman would not only fix that tractor, but change the rules of that property forever. The engine tried to turn once, twice. It died with a metallic sigh that echoed through the open farmyard gate. Silence. Only the morning breeze, carrying the scent of dry earth and old memories. Teresa Morales was 32 years old that Saturday morning, but her eyes carried the wisdom of someone who had grown up among tools and machines, and the weight of someone who had lost too much. Her thick, curly brown hair was tied back with a vibrant red bandana, that simple piece of fabric that had become her trademark in recent years. The navy blue coveralls were still clean, the yellow work gloves firmly gripping her hands, and large gold earrings reflected the morning light as she leaned over the massive engine of the versatile 1150. Behind her, 5 ranch mechanics watched in silence. Narrowed eyes, raised eyebrows, looks that said everything without needing words. Raymond Vega stepped forward, 55 years old, gray hair slicked back with gel, an impeccable gray suit that contrasted violently with the rural environment. His gold-rimmed glasses reflected the light as he pointed at the giant tractor with a gesture that mixed desperation and skepticism. "This tractor hasn't started in 5 years. His voice cut through the morning air. 17 mechanics have tried. Engineers with degrees, specialists who were paid fortunes." Pause, his eyes fixed on her, evaluating, hesitating. "You're the mechanic Arthur mentioned." Teresa didn't respond immediately. Her fingers were already running along the hydraulic transmission lines, touching connections like greeting old friends. She knew this model. She'd fixed 6 versatile 1150s in the last 3 years. But that wasn't what he doubted, was it? "Yes, sir." Her voice was calm, professional. "I came to make it work." One of the mechanics in the back let out a noise, almost a muffled laugh. Raymond didn't laugh, but his lips compressed into a thin line. 9 years ago, in this same yard, he had looked at an 18-year-old girl full of dreams and said with a firm voice, "Only men work in my shop." Teresa remembered. How could she forget? But Uncle Albert had been wise. "Holding grudges only hurts you, niece." And so she had moved on. Another job at a company where her talent flourished. 9 years of experience, hundreds of repairs, a reputation built with sweat and competence. Albert had passed away 2 years ago. He never saw his niece become one of the best tractor mechanics in the region. But he died knowing he had planted the right seed. Observe, listen, respect the machine. Teresa opened her toolbox, metal against metal, a familiar sound. Raymond was still there, watching, hoping she would fail like all the others, hoping to confirm what he had been certain of 9 years ago. But what Raymond Vega didn't imagine that Saturday morning, as the sun rose over the dry wheat and oat fields that hadn't produced in years, was that Teresa Morales wasn't there to prove something to him. She had come to honor the memory of a man who believed in her when no one else did, and she was going to do it the only way she knew how, by fixing the impossible. 9 years ago, Teresa Morales was just 18 years old, full of dreams, and the world seemed full of possibilities. She had grown up in a modest home on the outskirts of town, raised by Uncle Albert Torres and Aunt Grace after her father's death when she was only 6 years old, and her husband's tragic accident just 2 years later, leaving her a young widow at 24. The house was small, 2 bedrooms, 1 shared bathroom, a kitchen where the stove sometimes worked and sometimes didn't, but it was full of something more important than space. It was full of love and lessons. Albert worked as a mechanic at Raymond Vega's ranch for 30 years. Every afternoon, when he returned with hands stained with grease and coveralls covered in dust, Teresa waited for him in the small improvised workshop behind the house. There, among inherited tools and salvaged parts, he taught her the secrets that no book could ever explain. "Machines talk, niece," Albert told her while cleaning a recovered fuel injector. "They don't use words like we do, but they talk. You just need to learn to listen." And Teresa learned. At 14, she could diagnose an engine problem just by the sound. At 16, she helped her uncle fix neighbors' tractors in their home workshop. At 18, she knew more about agricultural mechanics than many men twice her age. That's when Albert made the decision that would change everything. One March afternoon, he came home earlier than usual. Teresa was in the workshop disassembling a hydraulic pump that a farmer had brought that morning. Grace was making biscuits in the kitchen, the smell of freshly baked dough floating through the air. "Niece." Albert sat on a worn wooden bench, exhausted. "I talked to Mr. Raymond today. I told him you're the best apprentice I've ever seen in my life. I asked him to hire you as an assistant in the ranch workshop." Teresa's heart leaped. The Vega Ranch was the largest in the region. Dozens of tractors, mowers, seeders. It was every mechanic's dream. "And what did he say?" she asked, containing her emotion. Albert's silence was answer enough. "He said he'd think about it," her uncle lied. But Teresa saw the truth in his eyes. She'd seen that look before: shame, powerlessness, repressed anger. 2 days later, Albert came home with the official answer. Raymond Vega had been clear, direct, and irrefutable. "Only men work in my shop, Albert. I have nothing against your niece, but that's how things have always been here, and I'm not going to change them now." Teresa heard the words with her back straight and jaw clenched. She didn't cry, didn't scream. She just nodded slowly, like someone filing away important information for the future. "Don't worry, Uncle," she finally said. "I'll find another way." Albert hugged her tight, smelling of diesel and metal. "I know you will, niece. I know you will." Neither of them imagined that 9 years later, that same man who had closed that door would be begging for it to open again, but now on his knees before his own pride. The week after the rejection, Grace served breakfast in silence. Black coffee, buttermilk biscuits, hash browns. Teresa ate without much appetite, thinking about the future that seemed suddenly narrowed. That's when Albert dropped the newspaper on the table. "Look at this." A small ad in the classified section. "Rodriguez Industrial Services. Tractor mechanic assistant wanted." "My friend Jack Davis is the supervisor there." Albert smiled. "I already talked to him. He wants to meet you tomorrow." The interview lasted 10 minutes. Jack Davis, a man in his 40s with hands the size of shovels, asked her just one question. "Can you disassemble and reassemble a hydraulic transmission without a manual?" Teresa did it in 45 minutes. She started the next day. The next 9 years became a marathon of learning and sacrifice that would transform Teresa Morales into tempered steel. Every morning, the alarm went off at 4:30, darkness still covering the world. She dressed quietly so as not to wake Grace. She made coffee, drank it standing by the kitchen window, and headed to the shop when the stars still shone. The bus left her 3 blocks from Rodriguez Industrial at 6:10 a.m. She always arrived first. The work was hard, much harder than any 18-year-old should have to bear. Tractors that arrived destroyed after entire seasons of abuse, parts impossible to find that she had to fabricate by hand, diagnoses that other mechanics considered impossible. But Teresa didn't just survive, she thrived. In the first year, she was already doing complex repairs. In the second, clients began requesting her specifically. In the third, Jack promoted her to senior mechanic, making her the youngest person to reach that position in the company. The versatile 1150 models became her specialty, those red beasts with over 200 horsepower, whose power-shift transmissions and complex hydraulic systems intimidated even experienced mechanics. Teresa learned every valve, every circuit, every secret of those machines. She fixed her first versatile 1150 at 20. It took 3 full days. The second took 2 days. By the 6th, she could diagnose problems just by hearing the engine start. The nights were equally intense. She'd arrive home after 7 p.m., have dinner with Grace while telling her about the day, and then lock herself in Albert's small workshop to study technical manuals, hydraulic system diagrams that she copied by hand until memorizing them. Torque specifications that she recited like prayers before sleeping. Albert visited her every night in the workshop. He'd sit on his worn bench, smoke his usual cigarette, and watch his niece work with a smile that said more than 1,000 words. "I'm proud of you, niece," he told her. "I learned from the best, uncle," she always replied, until one night 2 years ago, Albert didn't show up at the workshop. Raymond Vega was considered a successful businessman. He'd inherited the ranch from his father 30 years before, 500 acres of fertile land, 24 employees, state-of-the-art agricultural equipment. But inheriting wealth, he would discover bitterly, wasn't the same as maintaining it. The first mistake had been underestimating the value of the versatile 1150. When the giant tractor began showing signs of failure 5 years ago, Raymond thought the problems would be minor. "Another mechanic will fix it," he said, with the confidence of someone who had never dirtied his hands with grease. He called the first, then the second, then the third. 17 mechanics later, the tractor remained inert in the same spot in the yard where it had last stopped, a red monument of 6 tons to his own arrogance. But the real problem wasn't just the tractor, it was what it represented. Without the versatile 1150, the ranch couldn't prepare the soil on a large scale. The wheat and oat fields, crops that required deep, uniform soil preparation, simply didn't work. The small tractor he had left was useful for minor tasks, but completely insufficient for the 500 acres that needed working each season. The first year without the versatile, production dropped 40%. The second year, it fell 55%. By the 5th year, Raymond Vega was no longer the prosperous man who walked with his chest puffed with pride. He was a debtor, cornered by his own decisions, debts piled up like storm clouds, seed suppliers demanding overdue payments, the bank threatening to foreclose on the land, employees he couldn't fire but could barely pay. His wife, Beatrice Herrera, saw him sinking deeper into the leather armchair in the study, surrounded by papers full of red numbers. "You need to sell something," she said with a tired voice. "The lake house, the new truck, anything." "No," Raymond replied stubbornly, sounding more like pride than logic. "This can be solved. I just need a good mechanic." "You've already tried 17, Beatrice reminded him. "How many more?" Raymond had no answer. His eldest son, Robert Vega, had suggested dismantling the versatile and selling it for parts. "Dad, this tractor is worth at least $40,000 in scrap. With that, you can pay 3 months of debts." "No," Raymond's answer was emphatic. "That tractor is the heart of this ranch. If we dismantle it, we're admitting we've surrendered." But surrender was imminent. The bank had issued an ultimatum, 6 months to catch up on payments or they'd lose the land. That's when Arthur Moreno, the only remaining mechanic from the old days, and Albert Morales' friend, made him a proposal that Raymond only heard out of sheer desperation. "I know someone," Arthur said calmly, "the best tractor mechanic I've ever seen." Raymond frowned. "Mechanic?" "Albert's niece." The name hit Raymond like a slap from the past. Saturday dawned with clear skies and a temperature that promised intense heat by noon. Teresa had barely slept 4 hours, not from nervousness. It had been years since she felt nervous before a job, but because Grace had stayed up preparing her famous chicken pot pie so her niece wouldn't go on an empty stomach. "You'll need strength," her aunt had said with the wisdom that only women who raised other people's children possess. "That man is as proud as his ranch is large. It won't be easy. Teresa arrived at 6 a.m. The main iron gate was open, as if waiting for her. Arthur Moreno greeted her with a strong hug. He'd been like a second uncle all these years. "Ready, my girl?" he asked as they walked toward the yard where the Versatile sat waiting. Teresa adjusted her toolbox, always. The tractor was exactly as she remembered, bright red, or what remained of that shine after 5 years of direct sun exposure. Hood closed, enormous tires half deflated, dust covering everything like a shroud. But before she could approach, she heard footsteps behind her. Raymond Vega came out of the main house with his grey suit, absurdly formal for a Saturday in the country, impeccable. The gold-rimmed glasses reflected the morning light. The grey hair perfectly combed. He stopped 3 meters away, observing her. Teresa felt the familiar weight of that kind of look. She'd received it hundreds of times in 9 years. The look that measures, that seeks flaws, that hesitates before the evidence. But it no longer affected her like before. Now it was just background noise. "You're the mechanic Arthur mentioned." Raymond's question wasn't exactly rude, but it wasn't exactly courteous either. Evaluative. "Yes, sir. Teresa Morales." She extended her hand. Raymond shook it briefly, almost reluctantly. "Arthur said you know the Versatile 1150. I've fixed 6 of them in the last 3 years. Raymond tilted his head slightly. "That tractor has been sitting for 5 years. 17 experienced mechanics, specialists with international certifications." Deliberate pause. "Why do you think you could do it?" The question had multiple layers. It wasn't just about technical capability. It was about gender, about age, about everything she represented in opposition to everything he believed. Teresa didn't take the bait. She just opened her toolbox. "Because I listen to what the machine has to say," she replied simply. "Because I won't leave until it works." Behind Raymond, 5 mechanics watched from a distance, arms crossed, expressions mixing curiosity and skepticism. One of them, Mike Reyes, according to his badge, muttered something to his companion. A contained laugh. Raymond didn't stop him. "I hope you know what you're doing," he finally said. "I've already lost too much money on empty promises." Teresa was already crouched beside the engine. She didn't respond. Words wouldn't fix that tractor. Only her work would. Teresa began with the basics. She opened the Versatile 1150's hood with precise movements, revealing the Cummins V8 engine that had been idle for 5 years. The metal was covered by a thin layer of dust, but the structure looked solid. A good sign. Behind her, the 5 mechanics maintained a safe distance, not enough to seem disinterested, but not enough to suggest confidence. Mike Reyes, the oldest member of the group, a man in his 40s with hands the size of shovels, crossed his arms tightly. "They all start with the engine," he muttered to his partner, checking the motor like nobody else thought of that. His companion, a young man named Carlos Mendoza, nodded. "The engineer from Dallas spent 3 days just looking at the engine. He charged $2,000 and left without fixing anything." Teresa heard, but didn't respond. She'd already learned that in this profession words didn't convince anyone. Only results spoke. She connected a test hose to the hydraulic system. She pumped manually. Pressure was building but dropping too fast. "Interesting," Raymond watched from the shade of the main house porch, coffee cup in hand. Every few minutes he looked at his watch, a gold Seiko that had been a gift from his father. With each passing moment, skepticism grew. Teresa spent the next hour performing methodical tests, checking hydraulic oil levels, inspecting pressure lines, verifying connections. Everything seemed normal, but something was very wrong. At 7:30, she requested her first tool from the ranch. "I need a hydraulic pressure gauge," she told Arthur, "with a scale from 0 to 3,000 psi. Arthur nodded and disappeared into the main workshop. He returned 10 minutes later with the tool, a mechanical device with an analog gauge, exactly what she needed. Teresa connected the gauge to different points in the transmission's hydraulic system. She pumped, read, and noted numbers in a small notebook she pulled from her coverall pocket. First reading, 400 psi, should be at 2500. Second reading, 350 psi, even worse. Third reading, 200 psi. There was the problem. The transmission isn't generating pressure, she said, more to herself than to the others. Mike Reyes approached slightly. We already knew that. The previous mechanic said it was probably the hydraulic pump that was broken. And was it replaced? Teresa asked without looking up. Embarrassed silence. He said it would be too expensive, Mike finally admitted. Teresa closed her eyes for an instant. How many times had she seen this? Mechanics diagnosed the problem, but didn't fix it, because the cost scared the owner, and the problem grew and grew until the cost of doing nothing exceeded any repair. She stood, wiping her hands on a rag she pulled from her toolbox. It's not just the pump, she said firmly. If it were just the pump, there'd be zero pressure. But there's residual pressure. That means there's an internal leak somewhere inside the power shift transmission. The mechanics exchanged glances. Power shift, that word made them break into a cold sweat. It was the most complex system in the tractor, a labyrinth of hydraulic clutches, valves, pistons, and circuits that few mechanics truly understood. To confirm, Teresa continued, I need to disassemble the transmission. The silence that followed was absolute. Raymond stepped forward, away from the porch. Disassemble the transmission? His voice had a tone of incredulity. That would take days. Teresa looked directly at him. It'll take 11 hours, she said. If I start now. Teresa worked in silence for the next hour, but her mind constantly traveled to another time, another workshop, other hands teaching her. Every time she adjusted a hydraulic connection, she heard Albert's voice. Tighten firmly, niece, but not so hard you break it. Metal has memory. If you force it, it'll remind you later with a leak. Every time she measured pressure, she remembered those nights in the improvised workshop behind the house. Albert sitting on his worn bench, smoking while she practiced with salvaged parts from abandoned tractors. The power shift transmission, he'd explained one night many years ago that seemed like another life, is like the human heart. It has valves that open and close, pressure rises and falls, a rhythm that needs to be maintained. If one valve fails, the whole system collapses. Teresa had been 14 at the time, too young, according to social norms, to understand precision mechanics. But Albert never believed in those rules. He believed in talent, in curiosity, in hands that learned fast. Why doesn't anyone else teach this? Teresa had asked that night. Albert took a long drag on his cigarette. Because most mechanics learn to replace parts, not to understand them. They treat symptoms, not causes. It's easier, faster, but less accurate. Now, years later, Teresa understood those words deeply. She removed the first transmission access panel, 18 bolts, each requiring a specific wrench. Raymond's mechanics watched with renewed attention. She hadn't asked for a manual, hadn't hesitated about which tool to use. Her hands moved with the confidence of someone who had done this dozens of times. Grace had brought fried chicken for lunch, but Teresa barely touched one piece. She ate standing, drank sweet tea from a thermos Arthur offered, and returned to work immediately. The sun was rising, the heat beginning to intensify. Mike Reyes brought a large tarp and stretched it over the work area, creating shade. He said nothing, just installed it and left. It was his way of showing silent respect. Teresa removed the second panel. Now she could see part of the internal transmission system, the multiple clutches, hydraulic pistons, friction discs. Everything was there, waiting to be diagnosed. She touched the plates with delicate fingers, felt the texture, looked for signs of excessive wear. Albert had taught her that touch revealed what eyes sometimes couldn't see. Machines talk, niece. You just need to listen. And Teresa listened. She heard the silence of dead metal. She heard the story of 5 years of abandonment. She heard the secrets that 17 mechanics couldn't decipher. But above all, she heard Albert's voice guiding her like it always did. "You're doing well, Uncle," she whispered softly so no one else could hear. "I'll make you proud, even if you're not here to see it." 10 a.m. arrived, with temperatures already reaching 86 degrees Fahrenheit. Sweat ran down Teresa's forehead, but she didn't stop. She'd removed 6 access panels, checked all visible components of the power shift system, and found exactly what she suspected. The problem wasn't singular, but multiple. The clutch assemblies, those friction discs that allowed gear changes, showed severe wear. The hydraulic control valves had sediment buildup, preventing their free movement. And crucially, the compound shaft that coordinated the entire system was misaligned. Any of these individual problems would have been manageable, but the 3 together created a vicious cycle. Low pressure caused more wear caused more misalignment caused total loss of function. Teresa wiped her hands and walked toward where Raymond watched under the shade. "I found the problem," she said without preamble. "I need to replace the clutch discs, clean the hydraulic valves, and realign the compound shaft." Raymond blinked. "Do you have the parts?" "Not yet. First I'll try to clean and realign. If that doesn't work, then I'll need new parts." "The other mechanic said they'd need to order parts from Houston," Mike interrupted, "which would take weeks." Teresa shook her head. "If the damage is irreversible, yes. But I'll check first." For the next 2 hours, Teresa worked with an intensity that bordered on obsession. She disassembled the hydraulic valves one by one, cleaned them with a special solvent, used small brushes and wire to remove every particle of sediment. She blew compressed air through each passage, checking that flow was free. The clutch assemblies were more complicated. She measured the thickness of each disc with a mechanical caliper. Some were within acceptable tolerance, others at the limit. She decided to reorganize them, placing the least worn in the highest stress positions. The compound shaft required supreme patience. She loosened the mounting bolts, measured the misalignment with a dial indicator, adjusted incrementally, measured again. The process repeated 7 times until the reading was perfect. At 12 p.m., after 4 hours of continuous work, Teresa had completed what she considered the minimum necessary for a first test. "I'm going to try starting it," she announced. The mechanics approached. Raymond came down from the porch. Grace, who had arrived an hour earlier with more food, came closer to watch. Teresa climbed into the Versatile's cab. The seat creaked under her weight. 5 years of disuse had left the interior dusty and stiff. She inserted the key in the ignition. She pumped the clutch pedal several times to generate preliminary pressure. She took a deep breath. She turned the key. The engine coughed, vibrated. The pulleys spun. The hydraulic system pumped, but the tractor didn't move. Teresa tried to engage first gear. The lever moved, but without resistance, without connection. The transmission system remained dead. She turned off the engine. Absolute silence. Mike Reyes shook his head. Carlos Mendoza sighed. Raymond closed his eyes, the weight of 5 years of failures falling once again on his shoulders. But Teresa smiled, because now she knew exactly what was broken. Teresa got down from the tractor with an expression that confused everyone. It wasn't disappointment, it wasn't frustration, it was satisfaction. "The engine works perfectly," she said, while opening her notebook. "The fuel system is fine. The engine starts well. This rules out everything the 17 mechanics probably checked first." Raymond frowned. "But the tractor isn't moving." "Exactly. And that confirms the problem is exactly where I thought, in the heart of the power shift system." She returned to the exposed transmission area. This time, knowing what to look for, she went straight to the hydraulic control valves she'd cleaned. She inspected them again under direct sunlight, and then she saw it. One of the valves, the check valve responsible for maintaining pressure throughout the system, had an internal spring that wasn't just dirty. It was fractured. "There it is," she murmured. The fracture was tiny, almost invisible. The spring still maintained its shape, but had lost proper tension. Without proper tension, the valve didn't close completely. Without complete closure, there was internal hydraulic pressure leakage. Without pressure, the clutches didn't engage. It was the kind of defect that no external diagnostic tool would detect. No visible leak, no abnormal noise, just a silent loss of pressure, destroying the entire system. Teresa called Arthur. "Do you have check valves in the spare parts shop?" Arthur shook his head. "Not for this model. We'd have to order them." "How long would they take to arrive?" 3 weeks minimum, maybe more." Teresa thought quickly. 3 weeks was unacceptable. Raymond needed that tractor working. The ranch needed that tractor working. And she hadn't come all this way to say, "I need parts that will arrive in a few weeks." "Is there another option?" she finally asked. "I can make a replacement spring." Mike Reyes looked at her incredulously. "Making a spring requires specialized equipment. It requires steel wire of the correct gauge, winding tools and precision," Teresa corrected. "I have 2 of the 3. "Do you have high-temperature resistant steel wire in the shop?" Arthur nodded slowly. "I think so. The kind we use to repair suspension systems." "Bring it. I also need precision pliers, a fine file and a small torch." While Arthur gathered the tools, Teresa explained to the now genuinely interested mechanics exactly what she'd found. She showed them the defective valve. She explained how the fractured spring allowed internal leakage. She detailed how even a small leak propagated through the entire system. "That's why nobody found it," she concluded, "because they were looking for major failures, visible leaks, broken components. But sometimes the biggest problem comes from the smallest defect." Mike approached to look at the valve. "Damn," he muttered. "I checked those valves 6 months ago. I didn't see anything." "It's not your fault," Teresa replied without judgment. "This fracture probably started as a microscopic fissure and grew slowly over the years. It only becomes obvious when you know exactly what to look for and where." Arthur returned with the requested tools. Teresa spread them on a clean tarp, arranging them methodically. "This will take me 2 hours," she said, looking at the sun already past noon. "I'll try again after that." Raymond, who had heard the entire explanation, asked with a voice mixing hope and fear, "And do you think it will work?" Teresa looked directly at him. "Yes." Manufacturing a precision spring without industrial equipment required something no tool could provide: absolute patience and hands trained in delicate work. Teresa measured the fractured spring with the caliper. Diameter 8 millimeters, compressed length 15 millimeters, free length 23 millimeters. Number of complete coils 7. She took the steel wire Arthur had brought and cut it to the necessary length, mentally calculating the extra amount for the turns. She heated one end with the torch until the metal glowed cherry red, then cooled it slowly. The correct tempering process was crucial to give the spring the necessary strength. The mechanics watched, fascinated. None of them had ever seen this before, a mechanic manufacturing precision parts with basic tools. Teresa wound the wire around a rod of the correct diameter, using pliers to maintain uniform tension. 1 turn, 2 turns, 3. Each coil had to be perfect, with identical spacing. It took an hour and a half to complete the spring. She compared it to the original, visually identical. She tested the tension by compressing it with pliers. The resistance seemed correct. "There's only one way to know if it works," she said. Installing the new spring in the check valve, took another 30 minutes. Each connection had to be perfectly sealed. Each bolt had to be tightened to exact specification. At 2 p.m., 8 hours after starting, Teresa closed the last access panel. "I'm going to try again," she announced. This time, more people gathered. Besides the 5 mechanics and Raymond, several ranch workers had come during their lunch break. Grace was there, hands clasped as if in silent prayer. Teresa returned to the cab. She turned the key. The engine roared to life, a much healthier sound than the first attempt. The hydraulic pump worked. Teresa watched the gauge she'd temporarily installed. 100 psi, 200, 500, 1,000. Pressure was rising. A good sign. 2,500, 2,000, 2,200. It stabilized there, still below ideal specification, but within functional range. Teresa pressed the clutch. She moved the gear lever. This time she felt resistance. The clutches were starting to engage. First gear, click. She released the clutch slowly. The tractor shuddered, vibrated. The mechanics held their breath, and then it moved. 0.5 meter, 1 meter, 2 meters. Then the engine failed, lost power, and stopped. The tractor halted again. But for the first time in 5 years, there had been progress. The versatile 1150 had obeyed its operator's commands. The mechanics erupted in murmurs of surprise. Raymond stepped forward, eyes wide. Grace covered her mouth with her hands. Teresa got down from the tractor, this time with an expression of absolute determination. "There's a sensor," she said, more to herself than to others. "An oil pressure sensor that's cutting off the engine. It's probably faulty after 5 years of disuse." She looked at her watch. 2:15 p.m. I have less than 3 hours. But I already know what's missing. And this time, when she fixed it, the tractor wouldn't stop. Teresa identified the oil pressure sensor in less than 5 minutes. It was located at the base of the engine block, a simple mechanical device with an electrical contact that cut ignition if pressure fell below the safety minimum. After 5 years of disuse, the sensor had probably developed internal corrosion, making it hypersensitive. It was registering lower pressure than actual and shutting off the engine prematurely. "I can bypass this temporarily," Teresa told Raymond, who now watched much more closely than before. "Just to confirm that's the problem. Then I'll replace it with a new one." Raymond nodded. He no longer questioned. He no longer doubted with the same intensity. Teresa connected direct wires around the sensor, disabling its function. It was a temporary solution. No tractor should operate without a functional pressure sensor, but necessary for diagnosis. The next 2 hours became a ballet of mechanical precision. She tightened connections that initial startup vibration had loosened. She bled residual air from the hydraulic system, manually pumping until only pure fluid came out. She calibrated clutch tension with micrometric adjustment screws that few mechanics knew existed. She checked compound shaft alignment a 7th, 8th, 9th time. The sun began descending toward the horizon. Temperature dropped slightly, no longer the unbearable 86 degrees at noon, but around 77 degrees more tolerable. Mike Reyes had stopped pretending indifference. Now he watched Teresa's every move, occasionally asking about specific techniques. "Why do you adjust those screws in that order?" he asked at one point. "Because the clutch system is asymmetric," Teresa explained while working. "If you adjust them in the wrong order, you create unequal tension that causes premature wear." Mike made a mental note. Carlos Mendoza was also listening attentively. Grace brought fresh lemonade at 4 p.m. Teresa drank an entire glass in one gulp. She thanked her with a tired smile and returned to work. Her hands were covered in black grease. The navy blue coveralls now showed dark stains everywhere. The red bandana was still in place, but strands of hair had escaped, stuck to her forehead with sweat. But her eyes, those eyes that Raymond was finally beginning to recognize, shone with determination that hadn't diminished one bit since 6 a.m. At 5:15 p.m., Teresa installed the new pressure sensor Arthur had found in the shop's stock. It was a slightly different model, but compatible. She calibrated it according to specifications she recited from memory. She closed the last access panel. She cleaned the work area with a rag already completely saturated with grease. She stood, stretching her back that protested after 11 hours of intense physical work. She looked at the versatile 1150, that red beast that had defeated 17 mechanics, that had remained silent for 5 years, that represented the difference between survival and ruin for this ranch. "This is the last time," she said aloud. Raymond approached. "The last time you try?" Teresa shook her head. "The last time this tractor will be shut off." She climbed into the cab. It was 5:30 p.m., exactly 11 hours after she'd started. Teresa sat at the wheel of the versatile 1150, and for just an instant, just one instant, she allowed the weight of what she was about to achieve to reach her. It wasn't just a tractor. It was the entire ranch. It was the pride of a man who had rejected her 9 years before. It was Albert's memory, watching from somewhere distant. It was every woman who would come after, every girl who would dream of tools and machines. It was everything. She took a deep breath. She placed her hands on the enormous steering wheel. She felt the metal under her palms, cold, solid, waiting. Below, in the yard, a crowd had gathered. The 5 original mechanics. Raymond, with Beatrice, his wife, who had left the house upon hearing the news. Grace with clasped hands. Arthur with a smile already predicting victory. Workers who had finished their shift at the ranch but didn't want to leave. Even Robert, Raymond's son, had arrived from town. More than 20 people watched in absolute silence. Teresa turned the key. The Cummins V8 engine roared to life with a sound that made the air vibrate. Deep, powerful, healthy. It didn't cough, didn't hesitate. Just roared with a force that proclaimed, "I am alive." The hydraulic gauge rose rapidly, 500 psi, 1,000, 1,500, 2,000, 2,300. It stabilized there, within ideal operational range. Teresa watched the indicator with trained eyes. The pressure remained stable, didn't drop. The system was sealed. She pressed the clutch. She felt resistance, good resistance. The resistance indicated the clutches were ready to engage. She moved the gear lever to first gear. Click. The most beautiful sound she'd ever heard. The sound of metal engaging with metal, power flowing through steel. She released the clutch, slowly. The versatile 1150 engine shuddered. The 6 tons of steel and iron awakened from their 5-year sleep. The giant tires that had accumulated dust in static position for so long began to turn. The tractor moved forward, 1 meter, 3 meters, 5 meters. Teresa accelerated slightly. The engine responded with a deeper roar. The tractor accelerated 10 meters, 15 meters, 20 meters. She drove in a wide circle around the yard. She engaged second gear, then third. Each gear change was smooth. Each response was perfect. The power shift transmission, that complex system that had defeated so many, now obeyed every command as if it had never been broken. She completed the circle. She stopped the tractor exactly where it had started. She left the engine running, that continuous, imposing, unmistakable roar. As she exited the cab, the crowd's silence erupted into shouts, applause, whistles, the mechanics hugging each other, Grace crying openly. Arthur with his fist raised in victory. Raymond Vega remained in the same spot, completely motionless. His face had lost all color. His hands trembled slightly. His gold-rimmed glasses reflected the sunset light as tears he probably hadn't shed in decades, ran freely down his cheeks. Teresa walked toward him, wiping her hands on the dirty rag. "Your tractor works, Mr. Vega," she said simply. Raymond couldn't respond. He just nodded repeatedly as the weight of 5 years of failure lifted from his shoulders. Several minutes passed before Raymond could speak. Finally, with a voice hoarse with emotion he couldn't contain, he asked, "Who are you really?" Teresa could have responded in many ways. She could have been harsh. could have been vindictive, could have thrown all the pain of that rejection 9 years ago in his face. But she didn't. "My full name is Teresa Morales," she said with a calm voice. "I'm Albert Torres's niece." Raymond blinked. The name came to his mind like a punch to the stomach. "Albert," he murmured. "Albert worked here for 30 years. He passed away 2 years ago," Teresa added. "He was the best mechanic this ranch ever had, and he was the one who taught me everything I know." Understanding came to Raymond in waves. First confusion, then recognition. Finally, absolute horror. You're the young woman who—" He couldn't finish the sentence. "The young woman you told that only men work in your shop," Teresa finished without bitterness in her voice. "Just facts. I was 18 years old. My uncle trained me since I was a child. He asked you for a chance. You refused." Raymond closed his eyes. The shame was so intense, it was almost physical. "I don't know what I can say," he finally admitted. "I have no excuse. I have no justification." "I don't need your excuses," Teresa replied, "or your justifications. I came here because Arthur asked me to. I came because this was the ranch where my uncle dedicated his life. I came because, despite everything, I don't hold grudges in my heart." Beatrice, Raymond's wife, approached. She'd heard the entire conversation. She looked at her husband with a mixture of disappointment and sadness. "Raymond," she said softly, "you need to apologize to her." Raymond nodded. He removed his glasses. He cleaned them with trembling hands. He put them back on. When he spoke, his voice was that of a truly humiliated man. "Teresa, I can't change what I did 9 years ago. I can't get back those years you lost here. But I can tell you that I was completely wrong, blinded by stupid prejudices, by pride, by ignorance." Pause. "I deeply apologize, and although I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, I'm going to ask for it anyway." Teresa observed for a long moment. She saw sincerity in his eyes. She saw genuine remorse. She saw a man destroyed by his own decisions. "I accept your apology," she finally said, "and I forgive you, because holding grudges would only hurt me. My uncle taught me that." Raymond let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. "The repair cost. We can talk about—" "That's for later," Teresa interrupted gently. "Arthur told me about your financial situation. We can arrange payments." "Thank you." That was all Raymond could say. Behind them, the versatile 1150 continued running, its engine purring like a constant reminder that the impossible had become possible. Not by the person Raymond expected, but by the person he himself had rejected. Justice, Teresa thought while watching the sunset, sometimes comes in the most unexpected ways. 6 months passed. The Vega Ranch underwent a transformation that no one, not even Raymond in his most optimistic moments, had imagined possible. The versatile 1150, under regular maintenance that Teresa had established before leaving, worked perfectly. It cultivated the wheat and oat fields with an efficiency the ranch had never seen in years. The deep soil preparation that only that machine could do resulted in harvests that exceeded all expectations. The first harvest after the repair yielded 40% more than the average of the last 5 years. The second harvest, already using optimized preparation techniques, yielded 60% more. Debts began being paid. The bank that had threatened to foreclose now offered new lines of credit. Raymond could finally breathe without the constant weight of financial ruin on his shoulders. But the deepest change wasn't financial, but personal. Raymond had paid Teresa the repair cost in 3 installments, as agreed. Each payment came with a handwritten thank you note. In the third note, he added something more. "If you consider working here, the offer remains valid without any conditions." Teresa kept the note without responding, Late one Saturday, Raymond saw the familiar Rodriguez Industrial Services truck arrive. Teresa got out, this time without a toolbox, just a document folder. "Mr. Vega," she greeted. "Do you have time to talk?" They sat on the porch of the main house, the same place where Raymond had watched with skepticism 6 months ago. Now the perspective was completely different. "I've been reflecting on your proposal," Teresa began, "and I have a counter-proposal." Raymond leaned forward, attentive. "The ranch is growing. With the new loans, you're planning to buy more agricultural equipment. Tractors, harvesters, seeders." Teresa opened the folder. "That means you'll need a competent maintenance team, not just for emergency repairs, but for professional preventive maintenance." "Exactly," Raymond confirmed. "That's why I want you to be part of the team." "Not part of the team," Teresa corrected. "I want to manage the team as the ranch's head mechanic." Raymond blinked, surprised but not offended. Interested. "Continue," he said. "You have 5 good mechanics, but none have extensive experience with modern systems. I can train them. I can establish maintenance programs that extend the life of each machine. I can ensure you never again have equipment sitting idle for months." She pulled documents from the folder, cost projections, savings estimates, training plans. "But I have one non-negotiable condition," she added, looking directly at him. "The team will be open to anyone qualified, whether man or woman. The only requirement will be demonstrating technical competence, nothing more." Raymond read the documents carefully. The numbers were convincing. Very convincing. The proposal was professional, detailed, well-crafted. He looked up. He extended his hand. "Deal," he said simply. "Welcome back, Teresa, this time properly." When they shook hands, there was no hesitation, no doubt. Just mutual respect between two professionals. Teresa Morales assumed the position of head mechanic at the Vega Ranch 3 weeks after that agreement. Her first action was to completely reorganize the maintenance workshop. She established inventory systems for critical parts. She created preventive maintenance schedules for each machine. She implemented weekly training sessions where she shared the knowledge she'd accumulated during 9 years at Rodriguez Industrial Services. Mike Reyes, the veteran mechanic who had watched with skepticism that Saturday 6 months before, was now her right hand. "I learned more about hydraulic systems in 3 months working with Teresa than in 20 years of previous experience," he admitted one day while calibrating a new harvester. "I was never taught to think about machines as integrated systems. It was always, this is broken, replace it. You teach why it broke and how to prevent it from breaking again." But the most significant change came 2 months after Teresa assumed the position. One afternoon, Teresa called Raymond to her office. Yes, now there was a small but functional office next to the main workshop. "There are 2 people I want to hire," she said directly. "Mechanics?" Raymond asked. "Mechanics," Raymond nodded without hesitation. "I trust your judgment." "Who are they?" Teresa presented 2 resumes. Ana Patricia Ruiz, 22 years old, graduated from technical school specializing in agricultural machinery, and Lucy Mendoza Flores, 26 years old, with 5 years of experience in a family mechanic shop. "Ana has solid theoretical knowledge, but little practical experience," Teresa explained. "Lucy has lots of practical experience, but never had the opportunity to work in a large operation. With proper training, they'll be excellent." Raymond signed the hiring authorizations without reading them twice. When Anna and Lucy arrived on the first day, nervous, excited, clearly aware of entering historically male territory, Teresa greeted them in the workshop. "Welcome," she said with a smile they immediately recognized. It was the smile of someone who had walked the same path. "Here you'll work hard. You'll get your hands dirty. Your hands will get tired. You'll have doubts." She paused, looking at them directly. "But you'll also learn. You'll grow. And you'll demonstrate, as I did, that competence has no gender. It only has dedication. The following months proved those words true. Anna learned to diagnose complex failures with impressive speed. Lucy demonstrated exceptional skill for precision repairs requiring a steady hand and infinite patience. Mike, Carlos, and the other 3 mechanics, after a brief adjustment period, fully accepted them as colleagues. Because each day, Anna and Lucy proved Teresa was right to hire them. The workshop's productivity increased 32% in 6 months. Machine downtime was reduced to almost zero. The Vega Ranch became the most efficient agricultural operation in the entire region. But more important than the numbers was what they represented. It was living proof that change was possible, that when change was driven by competence, not prejudice. 1 year after that Saturday that changed everything, Teresa Morales was in the main workshop reviewing maintenance records when she heard the familiar sound of an engine. The versatile 1150 was returning from the field, driven by Anna, completing another perfect day of work. The tractor, that red beast that had been silent for 5 years, now operated more than 200 hours per month without a single failure. Teresa left the workshop to watch. Anna parked the tractor with expert precision. She turned off the engine. She exited the cab with a satisfied smile. "Not even one problem," she reported, "working perfectly." Teresa nodded with pride, not just for the machine, but for the young mechanic who operated it with such confidence. That night, after the team left, Teresa stayed alone in the workshop. She walked slowly among the organized tools, the well-maintained machines, the meticulously kept records. Her eyes fell on a framed photograph she'd hung on the wall when she assumed the position. It was an old black-and-white photo of Albert Torres next to a tractor, smiling with that smile she remembered so well. "We did it, Uncle," she whispered to the portrait. "We didn't just fix the tractor, we changed everything." And it was true. The Vega Ranch was no longer just financially prosperous. It was a model. Other ranches in the region began asking how they'd achieve such efficiency. Some, the wisest, noticed the maintenance team included 3 women and began rethinking their own hiring policies. Raymond Vega, for his part, had become an active advocate for equal opportunity. At Farmers Association meetings, he openly shared his story, how prejudice almost destroyed his legacy, and abandoning that prejudice saved it. "I rejected the best mechanic I ever knew because she was a woman," he said without shame. "I almost lost everything because of arrogance. Don't make the same mistake I did." Grace, Teresa's aunt, now regularly visited the ranch. She'd become friends with Beatrice, and together they organized barbecues celebrating the maintenance team's achievements. But the most important legacy wasn't in numbers or speeches. It was in letters. Teresa began receiving letters, young women from all over the region writing to ask how it all started, parents asking if it was realistic for their daughters to study mechanics, technical school teachers requesting Teresa come speak with their students. Each letter represented a door opening. Each question represented a mind changing. Teresa personally responded to each letter. She shared her story, she offered advice, and always ended with the same words Albert had told her so many years before. "Machines talk. You just need to learn to listen. And when you learn, no one, absolutely no one, can tell you that you don't belong here." In the end, the versatile 1150 remained in the yard, silent now under the stars. But tomorrow it would roar again, and the next day, and the next, because Teresa Morales hadn't just come to fix a tractor. She'd come to prove that competence has no gender. It only recognizes dedication, knowledge, and will. And that legacy would endure far beyond any machine. If this story inspired you, don't forget to subscribe to Underrated Mechanics for more amazing stories of mechanics who changed the world, one repair at a time. Hit that like button and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love hearing from you.